and glad to be towards the end of the presentations because we've had so many good ideas from all the other groups. You're going to find some overlap, some of the concepts. I hope what you've gotten from some of the other sessions, because we all, one frustrating thing I think to be in a number of presentations each session is sometimes what do you choose, which one do you go to, and you always feel like I'm missing out on something else. So in this presentation, bringing some of these ideas together, I'm going to leave some time at the end. Hopefully you can share some of the thoughts that you might bring that will help the topic growing the Green Party. How many of you were involved with the Green Party back in 2000 when Ralph Nader was running? Okay, a couple of people. I got involved at that time and went to my first statewide meeting in 2002, and we must have had, oh, I'd say at least 200 people, as you know, and I went to a rally. Nader came to a Minneapolis convention center, and he just about had the place packed. I was amazed. A really inspiring message, and you know, everybody got enthused. As I say, then a couple of years later, we had a state party meeting. We even had people willing to run for some of the U.S. congressional and Senate seats. So really inspiring, and I was just kind of blown away and just really new in the political arena. I had been involved, in previous years, but not in the Green Party. So I thought this is a tremendous organization to be part of. But you know, with the ups and downs, you know how it is with the election cycle. You always get a lot of turnout, or much heavier turnout. And then there's a turn down for a couple of years. And so I wonder what's happened in the last 11 years. We just recently had a state party, and we were having trouble. We had a meeting. I had trouble getting 50 people together, and I've contacted some of the other state parties and getting some good reports. There are some states really active, and Minnesota is active, but to get the commitment for people to come out, we don't have the same level candidates. Jill Stein really brought out some good people, but a name like Ralph Nader. So some of these things will be just kind of talking about what has happened over the years and how can we build the party back. I'm referred to often and during the talk about Chris Hedges' talk. He's written a few books, Death of the Liberal Class, and I was inspired. Is there anybody from New Jersey here? No. Some of you may have seen the YouTube video of the meeting he was the presenter at in the New Jersey State meeting. If you haven't seen that, you should look that up on YouTube. And I'm going to just show at the very end kind of a few-minute clip from that, how he thinks we as a Green Party will really gain traction. So that we can kind of dispute and talk about some of those things. As I say, I use his book as a centerpiece of our discussion. We as a third party, we have an uphill battle in trying to get the hearts and minds of people. And I think the struggles that Ralph went through in his rise and then kind of a quick descent kind of mirrors what Chris is bringing out, the death of the liberal class. As you know, Ralph Nader became one of the best known people back in the 70s, a real advocate for consumer safety, Man of the Year, often called upon to help craft reform legislation. Then corporatocracy began to take over. They began to say, what can we do to counter this? Because they were really afraid of what was happening. And you enter the Reagan era, and there's a steady decline of Ralph's influence, even to the point, as you know, that he was not allowed to even attend some of the debates in the recent presidential debates. Let's look at a couple of these terms. Do we have a democracy anymore? I think we can really, most of us here can argue that we really don't have a democracy anymore. We're under corporatocracy is in the definition here. Combined, it's hard to tell between a corporatocracy and plutocracy nowadays. A couple of books that are referred to here that really describes what's going on in our country right now. The effects of that, I think this is great pictorial, and there is a website. If people were to send in the donations they know are being given to any of the national candidates, this person would be willing, with a little help, to actually dress up your own public figure and put on the patches. And then somebody suggested maybe we should have like blue and red patches so you know in a Democrat or a Republican. Yeah.
You know what I was gonna say, you should have this picture have a Republican and a Democrat, and I'll bet you a lot of the same people giving money that's.
Exactly. So, you know, and then by the size of the patch, show the equal, you know, how much the influence is. I think that'd be a great thing to do. Okay, as I mentioned, these are a couple of books that I referred to. And what the plutocracy or corporatocracy has done, as we see in that previous slide, is they bought our system essentially. What we've had ups and downs in our history over the years. You know, the turn of the 19th century, the robber barons, and you know, we're used to these kind of ups and downs. But with FDR and the removal of his social legislation, I think we've begun to see a real steady downward trend. And it's hard to see, you know, are we going to reach a bottom here sometime? Is there an opportunity, or are we going to see the possibility of having an upturn? So we're here today with the commonality to try to come up with some alternatives to what's going on in our political system and to discuss how we can grow the Green Party. I'd like to emphasize maybe not just the Green Party, but say we should need to be part of a green social movement. In some of the discussions, you know, people have said it's really important to have a ground base, a solid base that we're working from, and not be a top-down type operation. But as you know, we really are facing some stiff odds to achieve what we're looking for. We've got a militaristic society where fear, patriarchic values dominate anyone. People feel the need to arm themselves. Our government is so controlled by the corporations, as we've seen, run by a small elite. And it's really hard, as I mentioned, to distinguish between corporatocracy and plutocracy. Their disrespect for our country, and what I think is very interesting gleaning from these books, some of the main ideas that come out. We've all heard these cliches or phrases, you know, I'm a self-made person, and you know, that can be debated. We don't want to take time on each of these issues, but there's no such thing as a self-made man in America. Everything is broadly built by what's been invested in the past, and we all need to be grateful for everyone who's contributed. And so many lives have been given up for the country, not just militaristically, but, as you know, building the structure we have. Disregard for human life, but we've gained a lot from all people, all walks of lives. Some of these groups, when you read those books I mentioned, they live, as I mentioned here, in their own world. They're more closely related with people in other countries than they are within their own country. And to them, class does matter. You know, their children and their whole walks of life, they don't even associate, in many cases, with regular people. Of course, they espouse winner-take-all politics. They're advocates for outsourcing so they can make better profits to reach their bottom line with long-term greed. And this has just given rise to what a real income inequality. And the term, I think we need to really become familiar with this idea of American exceptionalism that's pervading our government, that we can do it ourselves, we don't have to be part of the world organization, we're on our own. And I think this term, I don't know if people have heard of what's called inverted totalitarianism. This has come about by an individual named Sheldon Wolin, American political philosopher and writer on contemporary politics, currently professor emeritus at Princeton University. Some of the things he brings out, unfortunate, shocking terms in a way. If we were to compare our country with the German Nazi state, they dominated economic actors, whereas in inverted totalitarianism, corporations through political contributions, as you can see in lobbying, dominated the United States. The government acting as a servant of large corporations. While the Nazi regime, as it mentions here, aimed at the constant political mobilization of the population with its Nuremberg rallies, Hitler Youth, and so on, inverted totalitarianism aims for the mass of the population to be in a persistent state of political apathy. The only type of political activity expected or desired from the citizenry is voting. Pretty pathetic. And finally, while the Nazis openly mocked democracy, the United States maintains the conceit that it is the model of democracy of the whole world. So we really have some work ahead of us. Looking at the demise of our democracy, this malaise is eclipsing serious issues that don't permit the luxury of time to be solved. For those who connect with the 350.org, our environmental and global warming, you know what we mean. How about our failing economy, jobless rates, homeless, evicted homeowners, rising prison population, continuing racism, hunger, lack of health care, student debt, veterans with PTSD, and as Chris Hedges elaborates, the death of our liberal class. It isn't enough that we have the fundamental radical right, but it isn't enough for what's going on, but we also have the fundamentalists, the radical right that supports the Tea Party movement, espouses states' rights so it can carry out its agenda of decimating our education system, rolling back women's rights, and marginalizing our immigrants. These are just a few of the things I'm sure you can name, add to that list. Beside that, something that's been subtle, and you don't hear much about it, but if you look at the author in the bottom, Age of American Unreason by Susan Jacoby, she brings out a real good historical perspective of how we've really had a slide against intellectualism, what we call the rise of anti-intellectualism, right-wing rubric, the elites, pin down the liberals, and an intellectual, as it mentions, anyone who disagrees with the Republicans. Many of us can remember how we looked up to candidates like Adlai Stevenson and John Kennedy. You know, you thought here of individuals that are really well-schooled statesmen, and that's what we really voted for. We were trying to vote for the best individual. Well, we don't have to say much about what's happened in the last two elections. But beside that, she brings out a case of the rise of social Darwinism, which means that there's an emphasis on pseudoscience, anti-rationalism, anti-intellectualism. The competition now is worthiness of who comes out on top. Now, finally, even before we introduce ourselves to the public as a third party, beside all these other elements I brought out, there's just a natural argument against a third party being formed and supporting a third party candidate. So what are we looking at here? Formed often due to some political instability or perceived crisis. If we look at a history of the third party movement, we can trace the frustration in the citizenry and the formation. So they're not often a long-term movement like the two major parties. Most of the time there's policies that are not advocated or embraced by the major parties. So people may not even be, a lot of people may not even be concerned with some of those issues. The history of the minor party systems have been very short lifetime. And in many cases, they're personality driven. We always have that problem. That's one thing, we like to have a top personality for our Green Party candidates, but if you put too much emphasis on that when they disappear, then the interest in the party goes down markedly. Okay, oftentimes they're based on a regional issue. Again, going back through the historical pattern of third parties, we can trace that. And no doubt suffer from media, lack of media coverage. We never get the presidential coverage on the news. Most people don't want to support fringe characters or candidates because they say they're not going to win. And finally, obviously, we suffer from the financial support. So all these things are kind of running against us. And these comments come from a book written by Jesse Ventura. Many of you know him, a successful third-party candidate. He wrote an interesting book called Democrips and the Blood That Comes. No More Gangs in Government. Kind of an interesting title. Okay, so now we've had all the negative points and the limitations. Where do we go from here? How do we build a party? And as I say, like there's a social movement. I have on the chart over there also, just bring this up. As we think of solutions, and in these sessions, we've had breakout sessions and a number of good ideas. And I think I'd like to just say we need to keep in perspective what our decisions are being based on. And I mention these 3 points because, we work from the legislative aspect. We emphasize the need to get people into local governments, and that's certainly a good move. But if we're talking about environmental issues, global warming, how much time do we have? If we're going to start building a base movement, how many years is it going to take before we get people up to the state level and into the federal level? Certainly not in 4 years or 8 years. I think it's going to take a couple of decades. How much time do we have for things like global warming? We need to be acting on some situations now, not the next 10, 15, 20 years. Resources, any ideas we have or come up with, that's always a limitation. We might have great ideas, but if we don't have the resources to pull them off, the money or the people, then the ideas just are going to wither. We need to come up with ideas that we can really work with and go out immediately within the next few months, year, to produce some action. And then, consensus. That's always a limitation in some cases. We all know in our own meetings or other groups sometimes it's hard to get enough consensus to get people to move on an issue. So just want to keep those kind of things in mind as we think of solutions and plans for moving the Green Party forward. Okay, as we've seen in our breakout sessions and comments, we definitely are not alone. There's just all sorts of organizations out there who are espousing the same values that we have. So we just need to get these groups together, and that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. How do we knit these groups together? I'm going to ask that question at the end again for people to give some ideas. Once you get involved in a movement, or even get online, or sign a sheet you're interested, these are just some of the ones that I've bumped up against. I start getting flooded by mail, emails. There's a point where you say, hey, enough, I can't contribute. Even if it's $3 or $5, that mounts up if you got 20, 30 organizations that want. So these are some that I've run into, and I know many of you have others. Some more, as I say, that I'm familiar with. And I think that bottom one, I think if there's a way to gain traction with socialist organizations, I think we've got a lot in common, and if we can combine some of the efforts. Now, just in our state of Minnesota, you all have some of your own organization. We have groups that have more focus on local kind of issues. And I run into a couple of religious groups. I'm a member of a church, not that the church was related to these, but somehow I got pointed to some of these organizations, and they have some real good infrastructure. That Joint Legislative Council in Isaiah, I had a couple of sessions at the state capitol. And they really had a tremendous organization. And I was saying, boy, we really can learn a lot by the way they organize and have us go out to our various representatives. And then those are the organizations. Beside that, all these various internet resources and blogs. You might recognize some of those, and maybe even connected with some of those yourself. And later on, if there's a couple you think that you really think we all should know, you can bring that out, that'd be great. Okay. Now that we have these groups, now what do? We need to get organized and work with supporting the activities like meetings, rallies, parades, marches, sit-ins, and tabling events. The question I always bring out when we have a state meeting or just a local meeting, okay, you're involved, we have people that, obviously one person can't go to all these different organizations, but some attract certain individuals. You have interests that you really like to get in line with. Do they know that you're aligned with the Green Party? A lot of times there's things going on, and I asked a member, I said, do people know that you're green? And sometimes they say yes, but oftentimes they just participate. To really get that word out. So how can we begin to let people know, even nonprofits, okay, I know you can't support us directly as a political party, but you can just spread the word to people that we are a Green Party, and that this party is the only party that's really going to support you in the legislative issues. And even though you can't publicly mention us in your meetings, just pass the word, one-on-one, when it's election time, vote for the Green Party candidate. They'll bring about what you're working on a lot faster than working with the two political parties. Okay. So I think this is really an important level to build our party on. How can we help identify the Green Party beside one-on-one or passing the message? I think we need to be thinking of the idea of messaging, metaphors that really one can say, if you hear a phrase, that's the Green Party, you know, immediately recognizing, how can we get that message out? We need to know who we're talking to, what their situation is, as we talk about getting a message. Interesting enough, in one of the readings I went through, 40% of the voters are independents. Now, we talk about the two-party system, but when we think 40% of the voters are independent. So we don't always have to think we're just trying to talk to Democrats or Republicans. A great proportion of the voters aren't aligned with either of the major parties. So there's a real good group that we can align with. So one of the major parties identified with their messages, I said we need to be thinking of a Green Party message. And I'd like to just throw out a point. When you think of the two major parties, if you were to ask a group of people, what do they stand for? Well, I could say, what are the three main points that the Republicans espouse? If you took, you know, just a random set of people and asked them individually, you probably could come up with some quick consensus. The Republicans, you know, believe in smaller government, right? No taxes, privatization, individualism, let the market decide some of the major points. So no problem, okay? Now, what do you think about the Democrat? Is it quite so easy? What do the Democrats stand for? I mean, there's some general things, but it'd be tough to get a group that can agree on the major 3 or 4 topics, okay? How about us? If you ask somebody, what does the Green Party stand for? Okay? Oftentimes, the first thing they say are spoilers. You got Bush elected, okay? Environmentalists, you're tree huggers. And unfortunately, a lot of times, I've never heard of the Green Party. So we got an issue there. People don't even know about the Green Party. How are we going to get that message out? So just something that we need to be thinking about. So how do we communicate with them? How do we get that message out? As I say, do we know who we're talking to? What are their values? And the importance of messaging. And as in some of the books I'll mention again in just a moment, talking about framing the issue, the moral mission is what we really need to be emphasizing. And just bring out a couple points. As I mentioned, when you're talking about the Republicans, and they talk about tax relief, we need to get the message out, it's tax investment. We can't attack their message. We need to come up with our own messages. With the health care, we need to be equating health care with protection. You know, often if you look at what is the purpose of having a government, and it's mainly security and empowerment of its citizens. Well, as you can emphasize, we're wanting health care because it's a means to protect its citizens. And education, we need to be emphasizing the empowerment. You know, they try to always link education with costs and inefficiency, but we need to be emphasizing education is empowerment. We need education, a good education system. Some of you may have heard Reagan's phrase, the welfare queen. You know what that refers to? You know, those who live off the government dole, came up with a fictitious character who drove a Cadillac around and was, you know, living off the government. Fictitious character, but the metaphor stuck. You know, people just refer to that. Then they often refer to things like Clear Skies Initiative, which really comes down to Dirty Skies Bill, or Healthy Forests. What they really did is forest destruction. You have to look beneath what their metaphor is trying to say. No Child Left Behind. Well, attempts to kill public education. we need to expose and not refer to their metaphors, but expose what they are really standing for. So, and unfortunately, once you talk to people, as I say, if you don't understand their values, you try to present something in a reasonable or truthful or factual, but as David Human mentions, reason is a slave to emotion. So if people are emotionally involved in something, no matter what you say, it's not going to make a difference. So that's why I'm saying we need to understand the people and how we're going to try to get that message across. Okay. Now, in a couple of books, as you'll know in another slide, by George Lakoff, he said you need to recognize what the conservatives have done right. We need to learn from what they're doing in their messaging. He wrote a book called Don't Think of an Elephant, and that's exactly what he mentions. If you bring out something up front, you get ahead of your opposition with a phrase or a metaphor, that idea is going to be stuck in their mind. So the idea is if you're telling a group, you want to have them close their eyes, but you tell them, don't think of an elephant, and then, once you put that idea out, it's there. You're stuck. You can't reverse it. It's an interesting book. Comes out with some good phrases. And as he notes, the truth just doesn't matter in some cases, no matter how good your argument is. But you need to speak from your moral perspective at all times, because that's where we have the high ground. And as I said, you've got to understand where they're coming from as you're phrasing things strategically across issues, to carry that message through different platforms and ideas. As they note, voters vote their identity and their values. And we see oftentimes doesn't coincide with their self-interest. It's amazing. You think, this is an easy issue. Why can't we get the voters out to vote for our candidate? We're the only one that's going to help them. But that's not going to be the issue. And sometimes struggle within our own small party. We need to unite and cooperate. So just some thoughts about working with the communications and working together. Okay. I think we need to just get a little more sense of passion of what we're working for. We need to come up with those ideas of the master narrative. As it notes here, likable, charismatic, personal. We need to approach the people where they're at. And emphasize the moral high ground and the fairness, character, and moral correctness of our issues. Now, when you're working as a candidate, you just need to know that do they share the values most important to me? That's what a person is going to be evaluating a candidate on. So again, you need to know who you're talking to. The person's going to ask her in his or her thought, and say, can I trust you to represent me faithfully? And what about the personal qualities that you're bringing in front of people? Do they show me that the candidate will do right by my values and interests? And is there an issue that really matters to me? And what's their stand, and can I trust them? So when you talk to people as a candidate, you need to find out what are their concerns. As I mentioned, these ideas come from the book by George Lakoff, The Political Mind, and then also Don't Think of an Elephant. Okay. How do we validate our message? Okay. The old phrase, do we walk the walk, do we talk the talk? It's important that we are able to speak from our experience and know the 4 pillars, and you don't have to recite the 10 key values, but just be really believe in them, and how to follow through on them, that we can convince others. Okay? Books like, getting some grounding on What Matters by Wendell Berry, and also Democracy at Work, Cure for Capitalism by Richard Wolff. And a couple of these books really bring out some of the basic groundwork that we need to really understand as being Green Party. And is that What Matters brings out the facts that really nature is first, second, economics of the land, third is manufacturing, and only fourth should be consumer economy. But by understanding those values can help you when you talk to people, they'll realize that you're really genuine and believe in those issues. And with Richard Wolff, we read that book, as I say, Democracy at Work, A Cure for Capitalism. He really emphasizes the need for worker self-directed enterprise. He calls it WSDE, and emphasizing co-ops and the Green New Deal, that this can really turn around the way our capitalism is currently being controlled. We get more worker involvement and more democratic decisions within the workplace. Other ideas, as I note there, greater equality, rebuilding our democracy through stable local community life. Yes?
Could you back that up the slides so I could copy the books down that you recommend?
I did try to note the authors as I went through.
Okay.
Yeah. Anybody's welcome. If you want to leave me an email, I can send you the PowerPoint presentation from the CEDA. Achieving democracy, and note there, through radical decentralization and meaningful individual liberty, as I mentioned, through greater amounts of economic security. We need to get our jobs back, fair wages, which will give us more free time in the workplace, not just the workplace, but in our lives. Okay. Now I think it's really important to say, emphasize not just the campaigning. I think we need to really broaden our Green Party to be more active in the social movement. And Chris Hedges really goes after that. In the recent book he wrote, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. I think by understanding other movements, these are just a few, there's all sorts of movements and individuals, learning how they were able to make change and bring about social movements. Even the discussion was about Black Panther movement. Chris Hedges mentions where they failed and became militaristic. We're in such a system now that there's no way we're going to win against any militaristic or active revolt. We have to learn from the people who are nonviolent and be able to achieve our goals that way. Always, as we're working along in our social movement, if we're involved with sit-ins or support nonviolent activities, keep in mind, obviously, the purpose and the goal. The second one, concerned about being arrested. I'm not advocating that you want to go out and get involved in something being arrested, but we've seen how Jill Stein and Sherry Honkla did. How she got arrested, and unfortunately wasn't really that well publicized. But I'd like to just mention here a note from Chris Hedges' book, just a couple paragraphs. If we do out and do active resistance, we must stop being afraid. We have to turn our backs for good on the Democrats, no matter what ghoulish candidate the Republicans offer up for president. All the public disputes between candidates in the election cycle are a carnival act. On the issues that matter, there's no disagreement among the Republicans and Democrats. We have to defy all formal systems of power. We have to create monastic enclaves where we can retain and nurture the values being rapidly destroyed by the wider corporate culture and build the mechanisms of self-sufficiency that will allow us to survive. Going further, he says he was in an Occupy movement where he was just about to be arrested. They were doing a sit-in at Goldman Sachs. And he says, faces appeared to me moments before the protesters from Occupy Wall Street and I were arrested on a windy November afternoon in front of Goldman Sachs. They were not the faces of the smug Goldman Sachs employees who peered at us through the revolving glass doors and lobby windows, a pathetic collection of middle-aged fraternity and sorority members. They were not the faces of the blue uniformed police with their dangling plastic handcuffs, or the thuggish Goldman Sachs security personnel whose buzz cuts and dead eyes reminded me of the Stasi. They were not the faces of the demonstrators around me, the ones with massive student debts and no jobs, the ones weighed down by their broken dreams, the ones whose anger and betrayal triggered the street demonstration and occupation for justice. They were not the faces of the onlookers, the construction workers, who seemed cheered by the march on Goldman Sachs, or the suited businessmen who did not. They were faraway faces. They were faces of children dying. They were tiny, confused, bewildered faces I had seen in the southern Sudan, Gaza, the slums of Brazzaville, Nairobi, Cairo, Delhi, and the wars I covered. They were faces with large glassy eyes above bloated bellies. They were the small faces of children convulsed by the ravages of the starvation and disease. I carry these faces. They do not leave me. I look at my own children and cannot forget them, these other children who never had a chance. I think that's what he's trying to bring out, that as we move forward with whatever we're doing, we need to have some real images that is going to spur us forward, no matter what the odds. Yeah.
If you don't mind a question, then let's take that situation. How does anybody identify the Green Party in that situation? You know, how do we get some credit for even being part of that?
I know, that's the question.
You know?
I think we need to be discussing. Yeah. How can we get credit as we participate in these movements? You know, let's talk about that a little later. Okay. We've got these other issues here, the NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, really concerns us, we should concern us how now the military can carry out domestic policing. The President can find legal cover to serve as a judge, jury, and the executioner and assassinate U.S. citizens. Definite violation of the Fifth Amendment rights. No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, property due to the process of law. So we see the death, as I mentioned, the death of the liberal class in days of destruction by Chris Hedges here. Okay. We need to be asking ourselves, what does it mean to the parents of Trevor Martin? What does it mean to the black woman arrested and given 20 years for protecting herself and her family? What does it mean to have a company buy up the water rights? What does it mean to reach 550 parts per million of CO2 emission? And we could go on and on. One I was going to add here, what does it mean to not afford health care? So I'd like to just, I'm going to have a couple of short clips that I wanted to bring by Green Party people, but I just wanted to end this part of the discussion with a comment, getting back to Ralph Nader, Death of the Liberal Class by Chris Hedges again. He mentioned a quote from Ralph. If you organize 1% of the people in this country along progressive lines, you can turn the country around as long as you give them infrastructure, Nader said. They represent a large percent of the population. Take all the conservatives who work in Walmart. How many would it be against a living wage? Take all the conservatives who have pre-existing conditions. How many would be for single payer, not-for-profit health insurance? When you get down to the concrete, when you have an active movement that is visible and media savvy, when you have a community, a lot of people will join and lots more will support it. The problem is that most liberals are estranged from the working class. They largely have the good jobs. They are not hurting. Now, taken from a few clips, Ben Mansky was at a campaign school in Minnesota in January. And let me just turn on my speakers here. Just got a few minutes of clips here, which I think you'll find interesting.
See very clearly at this moment is that we are entering a period which for the Greens in the United States is a growth period. It is a period of great opportunity for us as a political party and as a movement. And we have seen periods like this throughout the history of this now 3-decade-old political party. We are in a good position to take advantage of that opportunity. And the reason for that is that one of our key values is future focus. And because we're such an old party at this point in time in terms of independent politics, we have been future focused for a long time. People in the late 1970s and the early 1980s who were looking at the experience of parties like the Ecology Party in New Zealand, or the Greens in Germany, or the Green Belt movement in Kenya, right? And then the emergence of the Greens in Europe, had the opportunity to look ahead. They were future focused, and they were looking ahead at the problems, not only of that moment, but the problems that they expected to emerge and become more severe in the coming years. And they built a political party that had key values, and more so, 4 pillars. And I think that those pillars, the fact that those are the pillars of the Green Party, and in the 1980s might have sounded a little bit crunchy to a lot of people, right? And now seem extremely mainstream and moderate, says something. The pillar values of ecology, of grassroots democracy, of social justice, and nonviolence. There were no other political parties at that time. There weren't really actually all that many social movement organizations at that time that brought together an understanding that the new society that must be created in order to end war and to deal with the problems of ozone depletion and climate and nuclear holocaust and starvation and deprivation and poverty, that new society had to be based on these 4 pillars. So now we are in, but you know what has to be done when that moment comes, and you're in a position to take advantage of that opportunity and to do something about it. The Green Party in the United States and the Greens worldwide are the only political and social formation that has been created to address the problems of this time. On the social movement side of things, and Move to Amend is a mass movement that Greens, myself, David Cobb, our purpose is to be an agent of social transformation, to change society. And if you think about those 4 pillars of the Green Movement internationally, the 10 key values that we've adopted here in the United States, the Greens started as a movement for social transformation. The early years of the Greens, there were all kinds of books that were written. There was poetry, there was music, and there was a lot of work on building the new green economy, what we now call the new green economy. Running people and winning elections and getting into the halls of government, and we have this movement side to us, which is actually why we do it, right? And they don't sit very well together. You know, electoral politics are generally mean. You know, Democrats are mean to each other. Republicans are mean to each other, right? They're certainly mean to us, right? And they've created a political system that is not designed for us to thrive. In fact, it's designed to make us, and actually not specifically us, but it was designed to make the Communist Party and the Socialist Party go away. That's why they wrote the election laws the way they did, was to get rid of independent politics several generations ago.
Okay, notice his emphasis on social movement again. That's the beginning of the Green Party.
See, very
Let's listen to what Jill
around
says.
the media. And just
We'll be
so that
hearing
people
more
don't
from her
feel
also.
defeated by that, remember what happened in the CISPA and the SOPA campaigns, that they were considered a slam dunk. The media wouldn't talk about them. There was absolutely no way that the censorship of the internet was going to be stopped. It was going forward, period, until it leaked out on the internet and and got onto some big websites. And within a couple of weeks, the bill was absolutely dead in the water. So, we still have the internet. They haven't managed to privatize it yet. There's a huge wake-up call going on, not only around the environment for climate activists, but for just everyday working people, for the 1 out of 2 who are that 37 million students who are indentured servants, period. So we have the numbers. We have the numbers. It's all about doing the work to get us connected, and it's about formulating the message. So there's every reason for us to feel empowered and powerful. We do have the power. As Alice Walker and many others before her have said, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing they have it to start with. We actually do have it. More and more people are realizing that they don't have it, that is, the establishment parties don't have it. We do have it. They have nothing to offer. They have no exit strategy for the crises that we are facing. And we actually have the solutions as well. So it is, it really is a golden moment right now, as Ben was saying. And the elections are how we actually challenge power. We say that this is not about a polite debate. This is about actually challenging power holders and saying that they do not deserve power. It's about challenging becoming the victim of the federal agencies and Homeland Security and the FBI, and and then the criminalization of protest. HR 347 was passed. As all these things started happening, there was a real wake-up call to Occupy that we cannot afford to leave any tool unused, and that fighting these battles in the electoral arena is just as important as fighting them out on the street. And in fact, there's enormous history, which Ben was alluding to in his talk, about how the fight in the street, when it gets together with an electoral voice, that's when you have actually transformational change. If you only have a fight in the street, or if you only have an electoral battle, you don't really change things. But when the two are happening and they get together, that's the transformational moment. So at any rate, with Occupy now, Occupy is actually working with us, certainly in New England, very closely, and it's been really exciting to see, and they are running candidates. We're in fact doing a green campaign school for the New England Occupy Convergence taking place in 2 weeks. Many of the occupiers are now Green Party members, have founded the New Hampshire Green Party, for example. So it's been really exciting to see their street skills now the jumping off point for their organization party building skills. And it's a really dynamite, powerful, unstoppable combination. And that's sort of the moment that we're in. I'll stop there. The campaign is the party. There is no difference between them. And your campaign and my campaign, there is no ownership of these campaigns. We all just kind of we work on what's close by and what's sort of upcoming, but it's all this kind of collective amorphous stuff, and the party has tools, the state party and the national party. Not as many tools and volunteers, et cetera, as we'd like, but enough to give you a hand. And in running a campaign, you change the image of the party, you recruit new volunteers, who initially are volunteers for your campaign, and then after the campaign, you write them a letter, or you have a campaign party. There are just various ways that you help transition them, either to the local Green Party chapter or the state party, etc., so that you keep working together. One of the most gratifying things to me about this recent presidential campaign was to see that when we continued putting out emails and encouraging people to weigh in or to contribute to a cause, etc., the comments and the responses that we were getting on Facebook and on the email were just as intense. They were at the same numbers that they had been during the election. It was like, just because they held a rigged election doesn't mean that the campaign is over, and it's like, this is the first time for me to see this transition among people, that people were not focused on what are we going to do in this campaign, but rather that this is about how we all work together for the long haul. So you really build that capacity a whole lot when you run. You find donors, and again, when you go out and you fundraise, you're not so much raising donations as you are developing relationships with people who have some spare. We had some really great people working on the campaign. And in looking for a campaign manager, I felt like it was more important than the candidate. It's harder to find people with campaign manager skills than it is to find candidate skills. So if you like working on campaigns, and in fact there's a lot of crossover between being a candidate and being a campaign manager. The skills very much transfer from one to the other. It's a great way to learn how to be a candidate, is to be a campaign manager and get the support in order to be a good campaign manager. So strongly think about that. It's a really important focus for us as a party. And then developing locals is also really critical. If you want to run strong campaigns, you also want to have a local. And you can jumpstart both of them at the same time. Other people will want to work on developing a local and get involved in some local issue, your schools, stopping schools from being closed, the fracking ban, whatever. You maybe want to work on something that has local traction, build a local chapter of the Green Party so that when you then launch a campaign, you've got your base to.
I thought it was great, again, that she said we have the power in emphasizing, again, the social movement part, growing the locals, as she mentioned towards the end. I think we need some consistency between the campaigns, some issues that we can really get people involved in. Now finally, you'll see a little different aspect by Chris.
And I think that those of us who care about the issues that the Green Party stands for have to begin to ask some really tough questions about ourselves. Because, frankly, as this last election illustrated, we're not having any traction with the American public. And I think the question has to be asked why. We're not going to build a movement if we're not relentlessly and ruthlessly self-critical. We'll go nowhere. And our layouts by their rules. It continues to put far too much energy into electoral politics. That doesn't mean that the Green Party shouldn't field candidates, but that should be a very tangential part of what this party is about. The other problem is that I think that it retreats far too often into the abstract. We, at this point, don't need another critique of the corporate state. I think all of us in this room, indeed beyond this room, have a very clear understanding that we have undergone a corporate coup d'etat in slow motion, and it's over, they've won. I don't think that has even become a radical idea within most of American society. Large numbers within this country recognize that it is impossible to vote against the interests of Goldman Sachs, ExxonMobil, Citibank, Bank of America, General Electric. You've got the list. And the question is, how do we respond? What is the most effective way to begin to mobilize against these entities that quite literally are going to destroy the ecosystem on which the human species depends for life? And we have very, very little time left, as anyone who has read climate science reports, including the newest report from the World Bank, of all places, understands. These unfettered, unregulated capitalism, as Karl Marx understood, is a revolutionary force. It commodifies everything. Human beings become commodities. The natural world becomes a commodity that it then exploits until exhaustion or collapse. And that's why when we to continue to essentially funnel energy into a dead political system, which is what we have, the political theater itself, I think essentially is going to suck out whatever life force we may be able to impart. The fact is, the only way that we are going to build any kind of effective resistance to these corporate forces is to rebuild the movement itself. And I think that we have to turn away from the enticement of running candidates here, running candidates there, having seminars on this topic or that topic. I just think it's going to go nowhere. I think we have to begin to turn and do a complete about-face and focus solely on what is absolutely concrete. For example, if I was running the Green Party, and I have no intention of ever running any party, I would put all of my energy into building a food bus so that when there were acts of civil disobedience, whether that is against the Keystone Pipeline, whether that is students who finally decide that they have had enough of the debt peonage, that of course is part, a long history, has a long history in this country of being a very effective form of political control, as any African American can tell you. You arrive and essentially are handing out, as we did in Zuccotti Park, bagels with peanut butter on them and coffee. I think that is the only way that we are going to build a movement, and that is to those of us who care about challenging this system, begin to create logistics by which resistance is possible. And that is the attempt to block the southern leg of the Keystone XL pipeline. Let's not delude ourselves. Barack Obama has every intention of building the northern leg. And if you talk to people, activists down there, what is it that they lack? They lack logistical support. And I think for what the oppressed need, and let's not be dismissive of the most basic things they need, which is something to eat, a place to live, rather than sleeping in their car. It's easy to, condemn, for instance, people who give microloans as holding up the system, and I think that this is a failure on the part of those of us who don't live in that kind of distress and don't understand now. And my book, which I did with Joe Sacco, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, it is written out of the poorest pockets of the United States, literally, including Camden, New Jersey, which per capita is the poorest city in the United States, and not surprisingly the most dangerous, just had its police union broken. And that kind of severance between ideologues of the left and the underclass has atrophied the left, has destroyed us. It's been a long process. Effective forms of resistance, we can expect tremendous blowback. Because internally, the corporate state is utterly corrupt and rotten. And the reason that they passed the NDAA is, I believe, speculation, is because they know that eventually there will be unrest, and they don't trust the police to protect them. And they're right. Police, for whatever egregious acts they carried out in the streets of Oakland or New York or anywhere, because it was a movement. And I think if the Green Party has any hope of becoming a credible player, it better do a complete about-face and begin to focus on the kinds of logistics that make resistance possible. Long discussions about the evils of corporate capitalism or showing another film at a college campus, I think, is an utter and complete waste of time. Because the Occupy movement utterly exposed the bankruptcy of the Democratic Party. So, and it would dramatically change the relationship that I think traditional Green Party activists often have had. But I think we've really almost got to begin from ground zero. I don't think that we have any option left. And I think that, again, if we want to have credibility for what we believe and what we care about, it is going to require us to move out of rooms like these and stand on fences in front of the White House in Washington Park and be hauled away by the cops. That's it. That's it. The time for talking is over. We don't have any more time for talking. Now it's about action. And so resistance parties like this one have a historic decision to make. They can either act or they can atrophy into utter irrelevance.
Okay. There, as it notes, it was his talk at the New Jersey State meeting this year, and there has been a rebuttal to some of his comments, if anybody's interested. But I think the substance is there, and the Green Party has done, he kind of dismisses a lot that's gone on, and as Jill said, gives us real hope for advancing the party. I think we need to kind of mesh them both together as we look forward here. Okay, just some ideas that I'm sure, yeah, sure.
Just seems very frustrating, and I think I just maybe wanted to mention that or wonder about that. It's just part of maybe what we do and part of this thing we're trying to do. It's just expressing frustration. Any thoughts on that? And not that I disagree with what he has to say, but I think maybe we all go through this. We all do. Just to bring that into the
Okay, I'll open up in just a couple minutes here for more comments. Just some ideas. I've thought that, we often attend rallies and various areas. Do we as a local have flyers ready for various events, that we could just hand out? A lot of organizations will hand out flyers. What does the Green Party have available? Let them know we're having a local meeting, or we're concerned about these issues. How many, and I gotta say, I haven't done this myself, how many people visit homeless shelters in inner cities where you feel uncomfortable going around, prisons, shelters? I think if you see, as Chris is mentioning, his experience in some of the third world countries, looking at the eyes of the children, really getting together with people, it would really raise your temperature for wanting to get out and do something. Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna say, I have gone to homeless, I do get involved in the inner cities, because we have Bruce's, prisons. If you go to a prison, let me advise you that don't go and say you're gonna do a political party, going with the Green Party, go in and say you're gonna do a Green Bible class. They won't let political parties in, but they will let Bible classes in.
Okay.
I have done,
Yeah. Well, I think we can get in one way or the other, but as you
Yeah,
say,
they
not
won't let you
announce
in if
yourself
you're-
as a political party, but I think individually, just understand what we're creating, this tremendous prison population, just ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate your tying together the Green Party and the Green Social Movement. I'm from Kansas City, Missouri, And one thing we're starting, have started, is what we call United Progressives. And the idea then is to help in this matter of building a social movement. And we have been bringing together the various progressive groups, peace, social justice, you know, name them. And we meet twice a month, I'm sorry, bi-monthly. And what we find is that this has some real potential. We have gotten into specific projects like building a model block in the very heart of Kansas City, and this sort of catches on. We've helped to build raised beds for gardens. Again, getting at the food factor, that people can have more access to food, food sovereignty, this sort of thing. We can make it possible then for groups to find commonality and work together. Let's say one group starting a petition, here will be the networking to work with many other social progressive groups, and we find some real potential there. Now, in Kansas City, I must say that our green movement is rather weak, but I think what we see is that underlying here can be a possibility for the political arm of this. So I bring out then this approach called building a progressive movement, and we have all sorts of groups, and I was just thinking of some of the groups, American Civil Liberties Union, and so forth, and so on. And the Green Party is one of them, and that is our movement, weak as it is, helped to start this.
Thank you. I'd like to get more information from you on that. Minnesota, I don't know how it rates for the rest of the country, if you know other states that are involved in ranked choice voting and instant runoff voting. But we've made some good strides over the last 2 years. Minneapolis is instituted in the last election cycle. We're looking forward to another election this November. St. Paul is just going to start using it. So we're hoping this moves into a state level, and that's going to make a big difference, I think, in the political party movement, the opportunity for third party. I think we're facing a situation where we're reaching this breaking point, but for some people we haven't reached it. I'm amazed that the unemployment numbers, we haven't seen more people out in the streets, but you know, when you look at some of the third world countries or Brazil, it seems like there's a lot more social activism. How do we get that incorporated into some of our activities here in the United States? I've been thinking from a nonprofit, an idea came up in one of our meetings, forming something like a social movement caucus that could be a nonprofit arm, not actually Green Party, but could be a subset of a group that just works with social movements and gets donations and is supported, you know, by the Green Party, but not part of the Green Party. And that's what I mentioned here, a nonprofit arm that can collect the funds. And as just mentioned, networking. I think it's important that we don't feel like we're alone just in our own state or local. Let's find out more of what's going on in the country, maybe in some of the discussions and the panels that are coming up. And with Jill tomorrow, we might find out more about what's going on in the country. I did have some reports from state parties, but we've got about 4 or 5, but I can, as I say, email these rather than going through some of their activities. But again, it focuses more on the campaigns and what they're doing. So I've got a couple questions I think I'd like to just throw out to everybody for us to consider in the last few moments here. What are the best ways to communicate with others? Going beyond what we know we've done, you know, like editorials and e-mailings. I'm trying to think of some other ideas. how can we knit progressive groups together into a larger, more influential social movement? Do people, as I say, do people in activist groups know that you are part of the Green Party and the importance of taking their presence to the next level, as I mentioned, to break away from the two-party system? And finally, what main points should we be advocating? And we have such a disparate number of issues, even the 10 key values. I think there's a point for having maybe just 3 or 4, like the Republicans have come up with, some key things that just keep hammering over and over and over again. And I get so tired of it. Tax relief, no new taxes. My goodness, that's bringing our country down because of the way they're bringing them up. The deficit, that's all you hear. What can the Green Party come up with that can really take hold and people begin to think, yeah, this is what we need to be doing? So I'd like to leave it at that. Whoops, let me go back here. What about these questions? Whoops, I lost it. There we go. So I'd like to end it there and open it up for discussion.
I see by your T-shirt, you must have been a candidate for an office.
Yes, I
Can you give
ran in
some idea what your campaign
2008
was-
for
what your
state
campaign was like?
legislature. And I had this on my sign too, on the lawn sign.
What was the office again?
It was for the state legislature. Yeah.
Did you have a set of issues that you campaigned on in particular?
Yeah, well, there was a stadium issue at the time, use of tax dollars. I felt it important that we have more community activity, more representation. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think the last one of the main points we should be advocating is something I've wanted the party to do as a whole for years. And David Cobb's said it's a great idea too. And what it is for every state to go in and lobby their Congress members, go have like a lobby week, like they do with Wilderness Week. And we have a lobby week where all the Greens from every state go lobby both their senators and their Congress members for 100% public funding of all elections, because people are on board with that. And it's like main points, it's like an issue, and it's like something they can't beat us on, because they already take money. And so if we did that, it would A, advertise that we do this, that we don't take money in elections, and B, point out the fact that they do. And they don't disclose, and they vote for the people that bring them to office. So that's one of the things, and then changing the speech. Just little things, like, someone says, are you a tree hugger? I said, better than a concrete kisser. I use, left thinkers use the right side of their brains, because are you a leftist? I go, yeah, left thinkers use the right side of their brains. Things like that just kind of come back to say, I call it disappointing Democrats. I don't call them the other name. Disappointing Democrats, Republicans, twin powers of politics. Just changing that, like you said, with George Lakoff, changing the language
messaging,
and changing the message, just like bring it back to them with different.
Yeah, I was gonna comment. I'm so glad you brought up the George Lakoff book, Don't Think of an Elephant. I think that should be a required reading for all Greens, because what he said about a big problem that we face is that Republicans will throw out an accusation, and then it'll be a 2-word accusation or a 2-word claim, and then we have to spend a paragraph or 15 minutes explaining why that's not the case. And we explain it in their framework, so it still just reinforces what they said. So even things like this, today with the saying anti-racism training, we're still using the word racism. So it's still, I don't know what other word you could use. I'm not a linguist, George Lakoff is, but the point being, like, when you're always working within the other person's framework, and I think we have to break out of that and come up with our own creative ways and unify the language that we're using so that the message is consistent in every state.
Empowerment training. Something positive, we have to stay positive.
Yes,
Empowerment.
instead of saying anti all the time, we're like saying protest, call it rally, and then protest. But I think that's one of the things, oh yeah, you're always anti. So I think that's one of the things we want to stay away from that word.
Yeah, but protest is pro something.
Yes, that's a good way to put it, yeah.
Jerry?
To add to that, maybe the use of organic language. You say we always have to succumb to their language. It's part of this just using it. When we talk to people and talk about things in our daily life or wherever we interact, mention organic language. You know, as simple as like I like getting outside or something like that. And you see, it can sort of not necessarily a political subject, but you know, it's kind of that idea. And then you start to maybe roll with it.
Okay.
That's maybe the small seed of it. You know, small. I think that can extend.
I think a good question that Chris Hodges asked is this idea of needing logistical support, you know, for the protesters. I was at the Occupy. I saw how it got shut down. I saw how it was running out of food. And there wasn't the support of the middle class to really come and rally around the people who were there in the parks. How do we, I mean, it's clear to me after what happened to Occupy that we are in a police state, and they will do everything to shut down people who are actually doing freedom of assembly.
Oh, I was going to say, in the Oakland, Berkeley area where I live, we brought food to a couple of the Occupy camps, and it was really hard to get. I think I felt like, at least in that, in Berkeley in particular, it was hard to figure out what the leadership was for Occupy, and there were people stopping, they had questions, and people walking by, curious. There were no information papers out, and they said, well, who's in charge? We have a question. They didn't know who was in charge. We brought food, and they said, well, you can just set it right here. And I said, well, you're going to let anybody know that it's here. It was the disorganization, and I know that it's because they don't have logistical support, but the disorganization, I felt like there are a lot of people that were curious, who were just walking by, shopping, and would have loved to have like a bulleted piece of paper, and it didn't exist. And so then they just went about their day, and so that was, I don't know what to do about that.
What do people think? I'm gonna throw an idea out. What do people think about, since there's the Green Party name, the Green Party label can work against us sometimes with independents and other people who would probably agree with our ideals, but they just can't get by the name. They think we are a bunch of tree huggers. They just think we're environmental and that's it. What do you think about having, you know, like changing your state party name to, I don't know, Throw the Bums Out Party or something like that for an election? And have it be lighthearted, you know, have some sort of lighthearted side, but also with a message so that maybe people would say, oh, everybody who's sick of voting for the other two parties would vote for that party. I don't know. Is it important for us to have the green name in the state?
Green Party is the largest party in the world. That's how I answer that. It's the largest party in the world, and we're in 92 countries. So I don't back down from being green. I said that's the future. The green is the future. We've been the future thinkers. So I never back down from that. And you know, I mean, so I would say I think it's an interesting concept. We have a theme like that to say Green Party Throw the Bums Out campaign. That would be, I would think that's. But we need to stick with the green because it's, you know, it's pretty well known, really. We just need to make it more well known.
But I think she sort of has a point about, to me, a lot of people are sort of sick of politics. They don't really, when it comes to saying the Green Party, you say Libertarian Party, people think that a lot of those movements and our parties want to replace the Democrats or Republicans, and it's just another power group that wants to take over so they could be the corrupt party, you know. People think that parties are pretty much corrupt, and they don't see any reason to think that the Green Party is going to be any different, or the Libertarians are going to be any different. I think we need to be directed toward ballot access so that we get more people involved in politics on a nonpartisan basis. And once people do that, then I think we get more done through ballot access building an infrastructure that will involve people in politics without a political label. I've been in minor parties for a long, long time, since 1990 or 88 or whatever that, and it just hasn't gone very far. We'll do, on some local level, we'll get 5 or 10, 15%. Most of the time we get less than 5%, we go to 2% or 1% or whatever, you know. And it has to do with money. We need to move to amend, get money out of politics, get a constitutional amendment to do what the person with the money is speech. And those are very, very important things. And working on that and getting behind that would be the important thing. But really more people involved. People are not necessarily attracted to ideological points of view, the left or right. I think a lot of people think that Greens are Democrats in disguise, Libertarians are Republicans in disguise. You know. So what's the difference? You tell me, what's the difference?
We don't take money.
I know
We
that,
don't
yeah, I
take
mean,
money
but
from corporations.
most people
But-
don't accept
well,
that.
that's our difference. That's the big difference. That's why we would be
Yeah,
different
but
in office.
But we have to go where people are. 80% of the people in this country don't necessarily embrace us, you know.
Gentleman back was next. And
Yeah,
then-
I'm sorry for showing up late. I'm just in the middle of doing stuff. One of the ideas that I had as far as getting our message out and piggybacking on the idea of the success now of DOMA and the Supreme Court cases. The equal sign has been established as a symbol for the gays and lesbians, for equality and marriage equality. Why not have a green equal sign with sunflowers in it? And we started a campaign, for equality for political parties, in particular our party, and getting us on the ballot. And so when someone asks you what does that equal sign with the sunflowers represent, there's your chance to talk about how the voters are getting a raw deal and not really getting a chance to choose among the many flavors of politics that are out there. But it worked for marriage equality. It could possibly work for us.
Okay.
You mentioned how do we get people involved, and I think that the touching on the aspect, how we interact with social movements is a very big piece of that, right? Certainly where I'm at in Detroit, Michigan, we did early in the formation of the Green Party in the early 2000s pick a few issues that we were going to concentrate on. At that time it was against the war in Iraq, instant runoff voting, and the big one we got involved in was water. And at that time it was Ice Mountain, pumping water, putting it in bottles, selling it at an enormous profit.
Yeah.
But in Detroit, that didn't resonate. And in Detroit, we found that there were folks working with poor folks who couldn't have paid their water bills, right? And we were able to bring this, coming from an environmental approach to protecting our water, to supporting those in poverty who needed access to water as a fundamental human right, right? And we were involved with other environmental, labor, and civic organizations in creating a coalition called the People's Water Board. And we in fact do act, much as Chris Hedges suggested, we are recognized when there is a rally held in Detroit that we can provide water. We have a food truck that can feed people, or a medical tent that can, protect the injured. But hey, if you're out in the heat of the day, just some water to drink on the march is something we can provide. And other organizations will call us up and say, hey, can you provide water to our rally? And they recognize, though we're doing it as the People's Water Board, that I am a member of the Green Party, and that we're involved and a part of that. So I think it's, it brings a lot of those things together. And I don't know if you're trying to get at it with that triangle there, but getting involved with the social movements that exist in your area, representing yourself as a member of the Green Party. We also look to those social movements for our candidates, right? When somebody's been working with poor folks and wants to speak for them in the electoral arena, they run as a Green Party candidate.
You were next.
I'm thinking that where the people are is the internet.
Yeah.
And when we saw what Snowden did to really go against empire, one man has changed our whole concept of the National Security Agency and these whistleblowers. I think it's got to be something very quick, some kind of internet campaign that allows us to start having global elections. I think national elections are not big enough for our problems. And we now have the internet, and we can actually create some kind of voting system on the internet.
I would go local.
Good thinking.
Well, I mean, you can't solve the problems locally without the global consciousness. Well, then we can disagree.
I think a big challenge that we face, and I saw this in the recent election, almost every friend that I have, they hated Romney and they disliked Obama, but they voted for Obama. And they gave the reason that you gave in your reading, where they're just so afraid of Romney that they just, the last minute, they just had to go with the lesser of the two evils. I think the biggest problem we have is that a lot of people do agree with us, but they won't even read the platform because they don't think we have a chance of winning. And so I think we have to find ways to show them different steps of victory. I think people have to understand that, okay, maybe we're not going to win the election for presidential candidate this year, but we could get on the ballot in every state. Like, I think we have to show people like a ladder of people in this country like to win. We're like a very sports-oriented country, and people like to be on the winning team, and they like to celebrate, and they like to feel like they've accomplished something. And so I think we have to, if we're just saying, vote for a presidential candidate, and even we know probably it's not going to happen, if we're even sensing that in our heart of hearts, then their doubts are even 10 times stronger. So we have to convince them that there are other victories on the way, is what I'm trying to say, that they can get excited about and show that we're like progressing toward an ultimate goal.
Well, that's where public funding would come in, 100% public funding. If we had that campaign, it's something that you can't, it's no lose. And even combining it with the equality, voting, say, we want equality in voting, and we want 100% public funding for all elections, which would bring equality in voting in elections, instead of being corporate, because I think a lot of people, I'm not gonna say I think, we all know, a lot of people are aware of, you ask anybody on the street, do you think there's too much money in elections? They'll say yes. So, I mean, that's something that it's kind of like would throw the bums out type of thing. It's what the people are thinking, but they think there's no other way. So we'll just vote your values. Just send messages like this. This is just a bumper sticker that someone in our state printed. I'll pass it around, but it just sends a message. It just says, you think I wasted my vote, your vote was sold, So it's just a message that just keep getting that message out there that you guys are getting, you may think you're voting for the lesser two evils, but you're actually voting for the same corporations that brought both of them, that type of thing. But if we go strong on that, I think it would be one of the best things the Green Party could ever do.
Something that Lou just said, that for those of you that might relate to what you just said, for those of you who attended that meeting over the Capitol, the York Capitol, over here, not far from where we are here, the senator had a pass out, he got it, a handout. It had to do with next year's walk from Los Angeles in, I think, maybe March of 2014 to Washington D.C. with regard to his pet project, and that has to do with global warming, the issues surrounding that a little bit. If we knew the route, and you had maybe not only Greens participating on that route for whatever length of time they could, they probably wouldn't go all the way from LA to D.C. And then also, if you couldn't do the walk, part of the walk, Greens along that route could talk about being out there handing out water, whatever. That might be something to consider.
Who is doing that walk?
Well, it's the senator from the state, he's senator from Miss Iowa, the state of Iowa. He spoke about his passion out of the Iowa legislature, in the Senate anyway, has to do with his baby is trying to get the Senate to deal with global warming. And when he spoke about, he was on a panel last night over here at the Capitol building. But anyway, his point was that he said, by the way, here's a handout you folks might want to consider. It's a national march from San Francisco, out to D.C. in March of next year. So it just occurred to me in view of what he had said in terms of what some of the other people had been saying about being supportive of that kind of an activity, whether you're directly involved with it or whether you're kind of a side participant in saying, hey, if you want a drink or whatever, you want to rest in the shade here, I've got something for you I want to talk to you something about this. I mean, that would be an ideal time, because certainly global warming is an issue for Greens.
Okay, well, we've already gone past our time. Thanks all for coming and some good ideas, and let's keep moving forward.
Thank you. Oh, good. Thank you.
Sure.